Welcome to A Little TLC, the podcast where we embark on an enlightening journey through the ever-evolving world of education. I'm your host, Heather Volchko, and I'm on a mission to empower educators and change makers to skillfully navigate the intricacies of serving our most exceptional students. Every month, we'll be exploring a unique and timely theme in a mini-series format, whether we're digging into inclusive teaching practices, addressing student mental health challenges, or exploring the intricate connection between our personal and professional lives. Each month offers an in-depth exploration of weekly topics that truly matter. I hope you're ready to be both challenged and inspired because this is A Little TLC. All right, it's hard to believe we are at the end of the month. And with all conversations that you and I have, we are always talking about the what now and the how now, but also how can we just make this business as usual? How can we just be this kind of a leader? How can we just integrate these ideas into just how we do our job, live our life? It's not just a good idea for the moment, that it's actually sustainable. It's something that could then, perpetuate just within kind of our natural dynamics from here on out. So right before we were hit record, we were talking about just right now kind of being this crazy moment in just the workplace with lots of different generations, lots of different, cultural backgrounds and everything all mashing into the same workplace at the same time. So do you want to jump in and share a little bit more about kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hit it on the head, but it is really a monumental time in human history, right?
Hmm.
Because there's never before been a scenario where you have 5+ generations in the same building, right? You have 70 plus. I mean, and also this is part of just the world socially of where we are, is that things are more expensive. The retirement that our grandparents had is not sustaining them currently, right? So we have older folks who have to go to work, right? So they're 70s and 80s. We have the boomers who are now kind of leaning towards their 50s, 60s. We have our millennials coming right behind them, our Gen Zs and our Gen Ys, right? And you have
Hmm.
people from, 14 to 40 to seemingly 400, right? And
Yeah.
they're all in the same building. And like as a leader, it's so important that and this is why this cultural conversation is so crucial,
Mhm.
because my role is, how do I build an environment where all of those people can see themselves, right? And where they
Mhm.
can see the value in each other, right?
Yes.
Because at home, grandma doesn't always listen to grandkid, right?
Mhm.
But in the workplace, I'll have two seemingly similar people and they have to be able to work together. So I think the role as a leader, this is kind of how I visualize it, is if I was to have a backpack and inside that backpack I had like 7 balls of yarn, my role is to know how to pull a little bit of each string and how to weave them together to make a beautiful tapestry, right? So
Mm.
in my environment, I have tons of different cultures, not only from a generational standpoint, from ethnicity standpoint, from racial backgrounds, from personal experience backgrounds, from
Mhm.
sexual orientations, from socioeconomic scenarios. Like there's
Yeah.
just so many balls of yarn in an organization. And my role as a leader is I need to learn how to weave them together, right? Not to say that this one's better than the other, not to say, well, this one has more strings on it than this one does, or I really like this color because, my grandma had this color curtains at home, or whatever the case, right? I got to learn how to pull it all together to create this. And I love the word tapestry very intentionally, because what that is, it's a bit of a smorgasbord, right? It's a bit of a
Yeah.
little bit of everything. Because I did a workshop called the Tapestry of Inclusion about a
Mm.
year or so ago, and that was the whole mindset of it, is weaving together these different pieces that now create a much more beautiful outcome. So I think really knowing where we are at this phase in human history, in business evolution, that really putting some practices in place that can build a sustainable culture needs to be priority number one for leadership, right? Now, the team doesn't necessarily know those things, right?
Mhm.
Just like a parent at the house, right? The kid doesn't know that you got up early and washed the dishes and put the things away and took the trash out. They just wake up and they're like, oh, the house is clean, right? So the same thing when I'm running an organization, it's not necessarily my team's responsibility to know those things. I need to be, as a leader, developing the space so that they show up and they're like, oh my God, I just love it here for some reason, right? Every time I come to work, I just feel better and I leave feeling charged, which is a very uncommon response to the workplace, right? But if I
Yeah.
can make that the response, if I can build a space where that becomes the outcome of my staff, my employees, my team, that is the biggest game changer, which really goes back to, do I have some core values in place?
Mm.
Right? What does our culture stand on? What are the pillars of how we operate? I was just at a large automotive manufacturing company recently, with which had over 500,000 global employees. And I sat with some of their leadership team, and they talked about the constant struggle that the culture is having
Mm.
because they don't operate with core values. Like, and I asked them, like,
Mm.
what drives you? Like, what is the through line through everything that you do? And it was a bit of a hard question for people. And what they are constantly seeing is their CEO has turnover. So as a CEO comes in, every CEO brings their values,
Yeah.
right? The CEO is not stepping into the values of the culture because those don't
Yeah.
exist. So if the culture was to have values, even when leadership changes, they know what role they play, right?
Hmm.
But if those values aren't there, then every couple years when there's new teams, and this is constant with everyone, there's turnover, there's promotions, there's internal hiring, people move, there's family scenarios. Like, so leadership is constantly changing in an organization. But if the leaders don't know what they're stepping into, if there's not a flow for them to just align themselves with because that value and that culture is already built out, then every time that change happens, change is going to happen everywhere because it's going to trickle down and there's going to create confusion. It'll create chaos. And when people are confused, they slow down. When they don't know where to go, when they have lack of clarity, they stop trying as hard. Right. So having these core, I mean, I know we talk about it and you're like, oh, values in an organization. And sometimes it can sound a bit like ethereal, right? But in reality, those values drive performance
Yeah.
because it gives clear standards of how we operate. And I think about that even with like sports teams. Like, I'm a Lakers fan, and I think about like the culture of the Lakers,
Mm.
right? And like how that was, and every new rookie that got drafted to the team, especially when you're playing with Kobe or one of the greats, right? Like, the standards of how we operate.
Yeah.
But you also know that these standards are for a purpose because our goal is to win the championship, right? So as a leader, I want to create these standards and environment and culture for ultimately the team's success, right? That's the whole purpose is and kind of going back to our last episode of valuing the people, understanding their role, contextual behavioral analysis, bringing all those things in to where now I put these things in place. People know what role to perform to. They understand a leader that prioritizes their well-being. And now together we can move forward. So like you said, when we started here, there's so much going on, right? Unprecedented moment in human history. And if I feel like as a leader, I need to be perfect, I'm going to become very quickly overwhelmed,
Yeah.
right? And realize that my job is not perfection, it's progress.
Mhm.
And if I give that same expectation to the people that I'm leading, to the environment that I'm creating, that don't be scared to fail, right? Embrace it.
Yeah.
Right. The goal is learning. The goal is creativity. The goal is adaptability. It's mental agility. It's, finding solutions. It's driving change and innovation. All these things happen from failure, right?
Yes.
Like, you only learn from messing stuff up, right?
Yep.
Like, I constantly am taking notes all day long on my notepad, and people will like look at me writing down notes and think it's impressive. And I'm like, where do you think I learned this lesson from? I just made it up, or like, like you only see the second part. The first part of it was the failure.
Hmm.
And it was the failure where I learned the lesson, and now I'm trying to just remember the lesson. And that's where I see a lot of people drop the ball is they mess something up, they want to adjust, but then they don't put any action steps behind that, right? And they're just like, oh, okay, I'll try it better next time. But don't actually write it down. Don't actually learn the lesson. Don't actually, there's two pieces when it comes to leadership that I see a lot. And so many folks are really, really great when it comes to knowledge acquisition. A lot of people suck when it comes to knowledge application.
Yeah.
And it's that little bridge that, because we live in an information age, like we talked about, where there's so much accessible, right? I can look up team building exercises. I can type into chat GPT, this is what's going on with my company,
Hmm.
get me 10 fixes, and it'll give it to you, right?
Hmm.
Now, do I apply any of them? Do I try any of them? Or do I just say, oh, I looked it up and tell my boss, I looked it up and here's a list of 10 and then no one does anything with it? Right. So it's not that we don't have the resources, we don't have the tools. It's not that we don't have access to the knowledge base to help us grow as a culture, as a team, as an environment. It's just, do I prioritize those things?
Yeah.
And do I prioritize myself? Because often my lack of priority around the things that matter to my team is because I'm not prioritizing the things that matter to me first. And I'm already shortchanging myself. I'm not giving myself enough sleep. I'm not giving myself enough self care. So when it comes to, well, how do I take care of the other people? Well, I'm just going to treat them the way I treat me, which I don't take care of me. So I'm not going to take care of you either. Right. So all these things start with a ripple effect of why would I value the core values of an organization if I don't know my own core values? Right. And everything starts internally of I need to set that example. I need to know what my role is. Right. And as an example, that's demonstrated behavior. If I want a culture, if I want a team, if I want a sustainable workforce that, values collaboration, that values transparency, that communicates regularly and openly, am I doing those things?
Yeah.
Do I collaborate? Do I share transparently? Am I vulnerable with my team? Right? Like all this stuff starts with example, starts with me, starts with what tone am I setting in the culture as the leader, right? Because my team is simply going to follow me, just like your kids do what you do. And one thing I learned early on is that kids, just like team members, they will do 50% of what you do right and 100% of what you do wrong, right? Like, so literally, when you start, and this is a thing that I had to learn in my business whenever someone was doing something, and I was like, why the heck would you do that? And I had to remember when I was a new person, and I did that same thing. Like, I asked that same question. I went rogue in that same way, right? It's like, they're going to copy you because you are their example of what this culture is. And am I setting that right example? Do they have the right values that are driving me that then I can implement into everyone that I work with and come in contact with?
If you're looking to continue this conversation, we want to invite you to join the TLC Network. This is where we come together as a supportive community who understands the unique challenges and triumphs of our daily journey in education. By becoming a member of the TLC Network, you gain access to professionals committed to walking this experience together. Learners get access to valuable webinars, enriching workshops, and engaging guest hangouts. Supporters gain access to our vibrant online community, monthly Q&A sessions, and joint discussions in a little PLC. Clever, right? Either way, you'll be among the first to access our podcast and blog pairing every week. Trust us, there's a ton of benefits waiting for you to explore. Just head over to thresholdlearning.org, click on network, and we'll see you on the inside.
But that's really that sustainable piece, right? If you actually have your decision making grounded in more than just the decisions that need to be made, that means it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from. If you are a fit with that culture, you will be a fit with the way that work is accomplished.
Yeah.
But that is, I think, the biggest gift any leader, and I do kind of, especially in this sense, use leader without titles, right? Like if you have influence
Yep.
in whatever that sphere may be, the best gift that you can give whatever it is that you're attempting to accomplish with whoever, those people are around you, it is having some kind of a foundation from which all of y'all can operate. And that's where you're talking about, like, yeah, most schools have, mission statements or a list of values or kind of core character qualities, those types of things. There's all these buzzwords for it. But a lot of times it's a poster near the front office.
Yep.
Does it actually make its way down the halls? Is it actually showing up in the way we interact during our meetings, that we interact with our communities? Is it actually permeating who we are and how we do things? Or is it like, oh yeah, that's what that poster was? Right? Like, is there any actual stickiness to it? So, especially in education, you're talking about, there's lots of different generations in the workplace. I mean, no one prepares you for being your first year teacher and your para's kids are your age, right? Like, my first job, and she was gracious and we worked it out, but like, no one prepares you to walk into your classroom on day one and give your mom direction, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not part of it, right? But then to both be able to view the work situation and to respect what each other have to offer, Like, she knew that I had things that she didn't have. I knew she had a lot of things I didn't have, and what we were going to do was going to require both of us. But
Mhm.
to be able to take that view into any team of any magnitude, that's kind of like a choice and a perspective that says, I am choosing to see everybody around me, not just for how they agree with me, but how they're different from me. And we talked about that back, earlier this month, is can we actually have that perspective, have it rooted in some of these values, and then from there, we just do our thing. And that's sustainable. That is different depending on who the leader is, who the people are. Like, that can stay the same even if different people or the projects, whatever needs to get done, all of that's shifting out because that kind of intangible thing is really what's grounding it and pushing that work forward.
Yeah, I think there's two big steps that kind of lead to that because I love that example you shared. And if and I agree when we're talking about leadership here, it's influence, it's not position.
Mhm.
So as a leader, as someone who can influence an environment, I think one of the most important things is you never miss an opportunity to communicate the vision and values. That's one thing I learned very early on is that there is no moment too small, right? I see so many people, they wait for like a large all hands type meeting or like, an annual conference. And like it's those one times a year where they'll talk about this is what we stand for. And this is why it matters. And we are going to progress the needle, right? And it's like that one time. And then the rest of the year, like you said, it's a little poster by the front door. So I think sometimes what we can do as leaders is we can make some dangerous assumptions that people know these things, that they
Mhm.
understand these things, and that they think about these things, right? So, one of the things I learned early on is you never miss an opportunity to communicate the vision and values, right? Even if it's a small little side hallway conversation and someone dropped their cup of coffee and they're frustrated, and it's like, man, I'm so sorry. I'll help you go grab another cup of coffee, man. And then exemplifying and showing
Right.
this is why, right? Like, man, I so value and appreciate you. I know you had a rough day. Thanks for even being here today and showing up early, right? Let me go grab that cup of coffee for you. I know you're in a rush. I'll go take care of it and I'll meet you at your classroom,
Mhm.
right? And like small little things where, we can showcase it and tell it and speak it and just get people to understand it because what that does is it leads to that part two, which is now we can create champions of the culture within the culture, right? Because the more that I communicate it to the team, now the team starts to become embedded with it. Now it becomes who we are. It's less of a task we need to do. And the way that I always frame it when I'm working with large teams is I call it organizational immunity, right? The same way
Mm.
I have an immune system in my body, right? Like I'm not thinking about a specific virus or a cold or a flu or that. I just want my body to be able to handle whatever comes. So I prepare my body for whatever comes,
Mhm.
right? And so many people, when they approach culture, when they approach teams, they're doing it for like, "Ah, I just need a shot for this." And it's like, yes, you do. But also, when your immune system is good overall, it takes care of that and the hundred other things, right? So when I'm looking at a team and an environment, I want to build that immunity into my culture so that even when Sally's upset, we're okay. Even when there's a misunderstanding at the meeting, we're okay. Even when the budget gets cut and we have to slow down on some initiatives, we're okay. Because we have the system built up, we're strengthened on the inside so that no matter what comes and attacks us, we're fine. Right? Because it's one thing to have the vitamin C on the counter, it's another thing to take it. Right? It's like one thing to have the poster on the wall, it's another thing to apply it. And like
Mhm.
we start applying this and empowering our people, not missing opportunities to communicate why we do what we do and what we do. Sometimes there's people who don't even know what we do
Yeah.
in our teams. Like I've gone into an organization and I asked that question to the entire leadership team, not the employees, the leadership team. And I said, hey, real quick, take 5 minutes, just journal down, what do we do here? And everyone had different responses.
Yeah.
And it's like we don't even know what we're not we're on a field and one person's playing hockey, someone's playing basketball, someone's playing lacrosse, and it's like no wonder we can't win the game. Like so we got to be aligned, but that comes from that constant repetition of communication. But where are we going? Why does it matter? And what role did you play in that?
I think honestly, like this month we've pulled together so many different pieces of us as people, how we bring that into our kind of who we are, how we do what we do, but then how do we then either leverage our, title, hierarchical influence, or just our social, people who, for whatever of their own reasons, may choose to look to us for, guidance or insight or experience. Um, like, how do we show up in those ways? But then with that kind of either given or selected influence that we have, what do we do with that? How do we choose to do what we do in a way that is then going to be good for the people around us, those that are entrusted to our care, either by title or by choice? But then how do we do that in a way that leaves an impact that long sustains, like well past when we've stepped out, when our people have turned over, when, just things change? How do we actually do what we do in a way that then it can actually just keep happening without us? Like that's to me, when I'm looking at sustainability, that's gold, right? That it can sustain without me, that whatever has been built collectively, and that's done in a holistic manner so that people can actually show up and be their, true, genuine selves and do the thing that they're there to do. Like that is the kind of like, this beautiful picture of this ideal world, right? But I think this month we've actually talked about a lot of different pieces that it's not that scary. It's big, it's
Yeah.
heavy work, right? It's very intimate and it's very intentional, but it's not super complicated. It truly
Yeah.
is just like, hey, you're a human, I'm a human, we're here to do the thing. Let's figure it out together.
Yeah. I mean, the thought that you gave me is just, the answer to that question is just simply is culture. Like that literally is the answer to how do I build a sustainable environment that lasts beyond me is culture. Right? Like how that is the response. That is what I build. And I think we talked about it a few weeks ago. One of my favorite quotes, lead to be forgotten and you'll always be remembered.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, a small, silly example, well, not silly, but a small example is the lunar flag assembly. Have you ever heard that story of where that came from?
No.
So when NASA sends people up to the moon and they go to plant the flag, there's no air in space. So how does the flag look like it's flying in the air,
Mhm.
right? Well, as they're building this out, there's a guy, what's his name, Jack Kinsler, and literally he's known as Mr. Fix-It at this NASA. So they call him up and they're like, "Hey, Mr. Fix-It, this is the problem we got. We want to wave the flag, but there's no air to blow it." And he create the lunar flag assembly, right? Which is a little tube that's, pushed through the hems to kind of hold the flag up and make it look like it's waving.
Sure.
But where did he get that idea? From his mom hanging curtains as a kid. That's what gave him the idea of how NASA put their flag on the moon, right? It's like, am I allowing these diverse perspectives, these things that you might think are so little and so small, and like, who would think of this, right? But it's like, it's having a person like that at the table who can bring an experience from their own personal lived, their lived experience to the table and say, hey, here's an idea. I think it might work. And then having people who say, that is a good idea. I think it might work too. Right. And let's go try it. Let's not be scared to fail. Right. Having that culture built in that lives well past us, where people see themselves being seen.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having all these conversations with me this month, for being willing to kind of put yourself out there and bring your experiences and share the corners of the world that you get to play in. And just to, have that conversation this month. I'm really, really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, before you jump back into your busy life, we want to invite you to head over to thresholdlearning.org, your one-stop destination for all things TLC. Here you'll find our blog with this episode's show notes, our ever-expanding bookshelf of resources, and anything else we've talked about. Trust us, there's a ton of benefits waiting for you to explore. Just head over to thresholdlearning.org, click on network, and we'll see you on the inside. Sharing the podcast with your colleagues is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at Threshold Learning TLC on Facebook and Instagram. A personal recommendation is by far the best way to share the podcast. Let them know they can listen on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else they catch their podcasts. Just be sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite platform. You can email us at info@thresholdlearning.org. We always enjoy connecting with fellow educators and champions for educational justice. You can find everything you're looking for at thresholdlearning.org. See you there.